Good evening. My name is Luca Bernardini. Tonight we are conducting an interview for the London Entrepreneur Social, and we want to take this opportunity to introduce one of our team members, Woon Tan, who has been working with us since we started the taking over the London City Circle in February. And he's been helping a lot on the technical side of things, organizing the videos and the recordings. And we thought that tonight he could tell us a little bit more about himself and his business and how he organizes everything. So, Woon, welcome.
Thank you.
And first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in London and what your background is?
Sure. Yeah. So, thank you for inviting me to your house and doing this recording. So, I came to London about 15 years ago, and I studied here in London. So I came here after my A levels, and then I did a degree in actuarial science to be an actuary in insurance. So I did that for about 10 years.
Can you explain to everybody what an actuary is, first of all? Because I know what it is, but not everybody does.
Yeah, it's a good question. So an actuary sort of uses statistics to sort of manage long-term risk. That's what a lot of actuaries are trained to do. And actuaries tend to work in insurance, pensions, and sort of in a newer or slightly newer areas of finance where there's a lot of data involved. And so you can use a lot of statistical analysis to sort of manage risk because there's just a lot more data. And so actuaries are sort of are behind a lot of these analysis, and it's a very still environment. So I'm a sort of star profile, and so I wasn't in the right sort of environment.
So what do you do? I mean, when you you studied here in London, and then you said that you moved to Leeds for a while.
Yeah, so I was in Leeds for about 4.5 years. I was working for a company called HBOS, Halifax Bank of Scotland. I was doing pricing of home insurance, so setting premiums for home insurance, and it's looking at risk of a house being burgled or a risk of the house having a fire, and then setting a premium based on lots of data. So that was what I was doing. Yeah, and after HBOS, I went to work for a company called Tesco Underwriting, and Tesco Underwriting is Tesco's insurance arm. So Tesco's, if you don't know, Tesco is a big supermarket chain here in the UK.
And they do pretty much everything, not just a supermarket, but obviously they're into banking, insurance,
Yes.
travel. They do pretty much everything.
Yeah, so it was quite good fun working in the insurance side of Tesco's, because we kind of got to see how Tesco as a big company had all these access to Tesco Club Card data, which was very unique, and how we used that to set insurance premium. So it was a fun times. That was back in the day.
So when did you then move back from Leeds you moved back to London?
Well, so I moved down to Surrey. That's when I was working for Tesco, and then what happened was I came across Roger Hamilton's stuff. I went to his Fast Forward Your Business events, and I've been going to his events ever since, like 5 years ago. And realizing I was a star profile, I made an effort to sort of, to do something much more suited to my profile.
So when is it that you had your Eureka moment, when you kind of had the light bulb?
It's an interesting one, because I don't think I had that like big light bulb moment. I knew I wanted to get into something where there was a massive wave coming around, and I was fascinated by all these environmental challenges. And being in the insurance sector, we really had a lot of first-hand sort of view of some of these environmental risks that we had to manage.
You had to quantify them, didn't you?
Yeah, we had to price it into the premiums. We had to have whole reserves for the bank, for the company. So that's always quite interesting. But I was really fascinated by all these new technologies that were trying to address all these environmental challenges. And so I started reading stuff, but it really was going to events in London that was like really prompted me to get into this whole podcasting side of the which is how I sort of got the confidence to leave insurance. So what happened was I ended up going to this meetup group called the Clean Web Meetup. So the Clean Web Meetup was looking at how clean technology and web and digital technology were sort of coming together. So in London, 4 or 5 years ago, there was this whole wave of new technology companies, and so. And London hasn't always been like a strong when it comes to like hardware technology, but there was a lot of digital expertise. And so there was this group called the Clean Web Meetup, and so I attended the meetup group, and then I was meeting all these amazing founders who were starting all these amazing companies. And so I proposed to do a podcast with them, and I was quite surprised that they were all very receptive to the idea of being interviewed, and I didn't have any qualifications or any sort of credibility in that space, but I was just bringing all these expertise of interviewing people, and they were happy to speak to me, and so I was quite surprised, but it also kind of gave me a lot of confidence in that the whole space is really growing and there was so much opportunity. And so I went on to interview a lot of founders and really using podcasting and interviewing as an approach to get into this whole new area. So yeah, so that was how I got into it.
In a way, obviously now you introduce your business at the moment, which is kind of like helping people launch their own podcasts and everything. But in a way, you have launched your business as a proper entrepreneur, which learns by doing rather than by, studying on paper and then applying things like the traditional way of learning things. So it's quite interesting the way that you got into this business by trial and error.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was this whole concept that Roger was talking about, that we're sort of moving towards leading learners, and so I was, I realized I could be learning and sort of doing something and actually leading something, and so I was learning so much more when I was doing the podcast interviews, and the podcast that I had was called Clean Web Conversations, and it was named after this whole movement of digital and clean technology. And yeah, so what was interesting was I did probably like 15 interviews, and then I realized that the meetup group needed help in the event itself, and so I sort of started helping the events side of that community, and that's how I got into events. What was so funny was after sort of helping out in that event, like in 2 months, some of the original organizers left the organizing team, and so I kind of inherited that group.
Well, kind of like what Roger always says, first of all, you have to show up.
Yeah.
And you did exactly that, by being in the right place at the right time.
So from there I left insurance, and I got my first job outside of insurance as a community manager, and I was working for a startup called If You Want To. And the website's called iywto.com. And it's a fascinating platform actually. We're trying to curate all these it's almost B2C services that are providing more environmental, more sustainable way of living. And I built that community on this platform, and I learned a lot doing that. And then from there, I moved on to a second role. I was working for a co-working space called Sustainable Workspaces, and I helped them launch their second co-working space in London. So it's actually the biggest co-working space focused on sustainability technologies, and so it was a really huge learning curve going into the whole sort of co-working movement. It was very exciting times. So I learned even more. I built up my network in the whole sustainability space.
It's very interesting because what you're talking about, you seem to have like jumped on the waves, on quite a lot of waves. They are very actual at the moment. So kind of like the sustainability, the podcasting, the eventing, the co-working spaces. So they're all kind of like really, really prominent waves at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's what is exciting to me. These waves are really big waves, and I think being able to contribute my small part is something that I'm sort of passionate about.
Oh, fantastic, and we appreciate what you're doing in the social circle as well, because I think we're all contributing for for a higher cause.
Yes.
So therefore, we'll participate, or everything goes to buy one give one. So
That's true, yeah.
we're really, really happy about that. But now coming back to what you're doing now and about the podcasting, I know a lot of people have heard of podcasting, but maybe not everybody knows exactly what they are. Can you just explain in simple terms then what a podcast is and what the use is of what kind of benefits it brings that to the people that they have them?
Yeah, so podcasting is a form of medium that is very much focused on the audio content. So when you have a podcast, it's really an audio file that is delivered usually through a smartphone device, and it's very similar to what video is in terms of how you consume it on YouTube, except that you don't need a screen to access podcasts. So podcasts, when we use the word podcast, it's really a term that came from Apple when Apple coined it through the Apple Podcast. So that was how it came about. And so podcasting, it's been around for a long time. It's been around for at least 20 years. But what's really exciting is that it's becoming very, very popular because people are starting to learn more and realize that you can actually get very high quality content through podcasting. So with podcasting, so you kind of access podcasts through these podcasting apps. So you can actually get podcast content, which are mainly voice content really, through Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts and even Spotify. Spotify is very bullish on podcasting as well. So it's all the major tech companies. So Amazon, you can access podcasts through Amazon Alexa. You can say okay Google, and you can play a podcast immediately. So that whole space of the internet is moving towards voice and audio. So it's not just podcasting, but if you look at things like audiobooks, number of audiobooks are just blowing up as well.
Skyrocketing, yeah. Also, what's interesting about podcasts as well, that it's not just like I know it's an audio file, but it's not just like a single audio file. It's kind of like a series of episodes and such. So you kind of like get to build a brand and build a story behind a series of podcasts. For some people, just kind of like turns into hundreds and hundreds of episodes.
Yeah. So what's interesting is podcasting is evolving, and so you can create a podcast which tends to be a bit like a TV show. So you create a podcast and you can have series, and you have within each series you have different episodes. And so with podcast is the same. So you have a podcast, and you can sort of do it in episodes, and you can create a trailer. You can sort of you can promote it as series, and you can sort of do it in many different ways. There's almost no rule into what is acceptable or what is not acceptable.
Let's say, give an example. Let's say if there was a series of called, I don't know, the Entrepreneur Social interviews, that could be one episode of that series. Yeah. For example, then people know because of the title, they know roughly what kind of content they're going to get, and then obviously every episode is different.
Yeah. So every episode, for instance, could be an interview, and it could be so usually the episodes would have a same host or same format or some sort of theme that ties it all together, and then a lot of it is interview based, but also you can do it in monologues. You can do it with more sort of music focus, and so it's really audio content. And there's also a newer sort of style of doing podcasting, which is really focused on narrative storytelling, and those style are very much like a super produced radio show, and it's lots of high quality journalistic production and interviews and editing, and so there's a whole bunch of variety of new types of content, and the diversity of podcast content is increasing. So it's a very exciting space.
Fantastic. And what's the benefit for somebody that wants to have their own podcast? Why would somebody do it?
Yeah, so podcasting is growing at a very quick pace at the moment. So some places they're growing like 20% every year on year, and then we are seeing not just the number of audience increasing, but also the engagement level increasing. So with podcasting, the attention span is a lot longer. So people listen to podcasts that are an hour long or half an hour long, and you still find that your listeners would continue listening a full episode, and you don't get that with videos and sort of reading blog posts. That's even the attention span has really reduced. So in terms of how podcast sits compared to other types of medium, it's a very engaging platform. So yeah, as a business owner, you can use podcasts to build your personal brand. You can use podcasts to tell customer stories. You can use it to really shine a light on your customers, or the issues or the problems that you're trying to help solve for your customers.
And also build a community, I imagine.
Exactly.
I imagine kind of like the advantage of it as well is that kind of like you can listen to it on the go while you're doing other things. So while you're driving, while you're traveling, without having to occupy your eyes at the same time, so while you can be doing other things but still listen to the podcast.
Yeah, so that's actually a very good point, because that's one of the reasons why podcasting is attracting this whole new set of audience, is precisely because the sort of user experience of podcasting is changing and it's evolving, but also people are starting to realize like there's just too much information out there, and with podcasting they can actually access quite high quality content, quite in depth, and have a sort of more intimate conversation, and actually sort of listen into conversations that are much more insightful, and so they get a lot of value through that sort of experience.
Fantastic. And what exactly is it that you provide? Let's say if I was a new customer for you, so what would you do? What would you offer? What would you offer me?
Yeah, thanks Luca for that question. So I launched a company called Podcast Publishing about 6 months ago, and what we do for our clients is we help impact entrepreneurs set up and launch a podcast. And so with podcasting at the moment, there's still quite a bit of a hurdle to get your podcast up and running, get the right equipment set up, and get the audio branding correct. And so I help the sort of full end-to-end process, and we have sort of I guess what we call the full service concierge, which is really helping you launch your podcast in the space of 1 month and getting you sort of up to scratch in terms of this type of content you want to tell, helping you get clarity on the branding that you want to have, and so that you can actually tell your stories and get to the right audience. But also not just that, we create sort of remarketing to get more people listening to your podcast. So we help drive traffic back to your podcast.
Sure. And what about equipment? Like, we got this big microphones in front of us today. I know, I'm very grateful for you bringing them here. And obviously we got, you can't see it on the video, but we got nice lighting as well. So, obviously this is a video interview, so that's why we have the lighting, but for a podcast normally that wouldn't be required. So what kind of equipment would you need?
Yeah, so really effectively you just need a mic that records good quality audio, and from there you can you can sort of do the editing from there. But what people really focus on is the audio content and the voice. So if you're doing it through virtual interviews, you need to make sure that you got a decent enough mic. And if you're doing face-to-face interviews, you want something like what we have right now, which is two different mics for the guest and the host, and then we have this thing called the Zoom H4n, which is a digital audio recorder. So it's a device that connects the mic into an SD card. So you can there's sort of different levels of complexity you can go into when it comes to equipment.
So it's easy, basically. Once you've done the recording, you can just literally take out the SD card and put it into your computer.
Yes, pretty much.
And then work on it from there.
Yeah, so you tend to get what you call a WAV file or MP3 file, and from there we can do the editing. So that's usually as simple as it gets.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I think it's been very, very informative, because although I knew about podcasts, I have listened to a few podcasts in my time as well, but sometimes they still kind of didn't quite know how it all came about, and I think you cleared it really, for all of us. Now, if any of you want to get in touch with Woon, I think the best place to do it is at the London City Circle,
yes.
which goes on the first Wednesday of the month, of every month. You can find the details on the London City Circle Facebook page. And also, please put a comment in this this file as well, if you want to get in touch with Woon directly, and he will respond to you personally.
Yeah, I think also we're gonna put it somewhere in probably the GeniusU platform, and
sure,
so people can connect.
Definitely, in all the places where we advertise our events, we'll put in an interview as well. So we just want to say thank you very much for coming here tonight with all this great equipment, and for starting this maybe who knows, a long series of interviews.
Yes,
so
yeah.
The first of many, I hope.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it will be the first of many.
Thank you very much, and we hope to see you all soon at the next London City Circle, which is going to be on Wednesday, the 3rd of July. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.